There is a treatment for anxiety that has been clinically tested in over 400 randomized trials across 50,000 patients. It works. It is the most validated psychological intervention in modern medicine, and the man who wrote its core operating manual did it by candlelight in a Roman military tent 1800 years ago. He never charged anyone a dime. Between 170 and 180 AD, the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius, while commanding legions on the Danube frontier near a military outpost called Carnuntum, wrote 12 books of private reflections, never meant for anyone else's eyes, just a man trying to manage his own mind during a decade of war, plague, and betrayal. Those private notes became meditations, one of the most influential texts in Western history. In 1955, a psychologist named Albert Ellis read those same Stoic texts and built an entirely new form of therapy around them. A decade later, Dr. Aaron Beck at the University of Pennsylvania refined it further. They called it cognitive behavioral therapy. Today, it is the gold standard treatment for anxiety and depression worldwide. Both Ellis and Beck openly credited the Stoics as their philosophical foundation. This is not interpretation, this is what they said. But here is what nobody talks about. The core techniques in CBT, the ones clinically proven to reduce anxiety by measurable, replicable margins, were all described in detail in texts that have been freely available for nearly 2,000 years. Epictetus wrote them down. Seneca practiced them nightly. Marcus Aurelius journaled them on the battlefield. They did not stop being taught because they stopped working. They stopped being taught because you cannot bill for a philosophy that anyone can read for free, and what cannot generate a monthly appointment, a subscription, or an insurance code gets quietly replaced by something that can. Welcome back to Stoic Life Principles. If the history behind the ideas that actually work matters to you, subscribe and hit the bell. This is where we open what got buried under 2,000 years of repackaging. Let me take you back to the Danube frontier, around 170 AD. Marcus Aurelius is not sitting in a marble palace. He is in a military camp. The Antonine Plague, likely smallpox, is killing thousands of his soldiers. Germanic tribes are pressing the northern border. His most trusted general, Avidius Cassius, will soon attempt a coup. Marcus is exhausted, grieving, and under unimaginable pressure, and every night by lamplight he opens his journal, written in Greek, his philosophical language, and interrogates his own mind. Not prayers, not complaints, specific psychological techniques. He writes, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." He writes, "The happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts." He catalogs his fears, examines whether they're rational, and rehearses how he would respond if the worst actually happened. He did not know it, but he was performing what modern psychology would later call cognitive restructuring, decatastrophizing, and thought records. But here is where it gets interesting. Marcus was not inventing this. He was practicing a system that was already centuries old. Around 55 AD, more than 100 years before Marcus picked up his journal, a formerly enslaved man named Epictetus was teaching in Nicopolis, Greece. Epictetus had been born into slavery in Hierapolis in modern-day Turkey. After gaining his freedom, he developed one of the most rigorous frameworks for mental resilience ever constructed. His students compiled his teachings into the discourses in a shorter handbook called the Enchiridion. The opening principle of the Enchiridion is this: it is not things that disturb us, but our judgments about things. Read that line again. Because in 1955, a psychologist in New York named Albert Ellis read that exact line and said, "This is the foundation of a new psychotherapy." Ellis developed rational emotive behavior therapy, REBT, which he later described as the original cognitive behavioral therapy. He explicitly and repeatedly credited Epictetus as his primary philosophical influence. This is documented in his published works, his lectures, and his interviews. He quoted that line from the Enchiridion for the rest of his career. Then in the 1960s, Dr. Aaron Beck at the University of Pennsylvania, working independently, developed his own version of cognitive therapy. Beck's approach also centered on identifying and challenging distorted thoughts. The intellectual lineage traces directly back through the same Stoic texts. And this is the part that should make you angry. Both founders said this publicly. Ellis and Beck acknowledged, in their own words, that ancient Stoic philosophy was the philosophical precursor to their clinical work. A 2023 paper in the National Library of Medicine confirmed that both explicitly acknowledged the role of Stoicism as the philosophical precursor of their treatment approaches. This was never a secret. It was just never marketed. Here's how it actually works, and the science is not ambiguous. The core insight of both Stoicism and CBT is identical. Your emotional suffering is not caused by what happens to you. It is caused by your interpretation of what happens to you. Change the interpretation, and the emotion changes with it. Epictetus said it in 55 AD. Beck formalized it as the cognitive model in 1964. In CBT, this process is called cognitive restructuring. You identify an automatic negative thought. I'm going to fail this presentation and everyone will think I'm incompetent. And you systematically evaluate the evidence for and against that thought. You test it like a hypothesis. Marcus Aurelius did exactly this in Meditations Book 2, stripping events down to their objective reality, removing the emotional narrative layered on top. Modern CBT therapists call this technique decatastrophizing. Marcus just called it seeing things as they are. But here's where it gets interesting. The Stoics had at least 4 techniques that map directly to clinically validated CBT protocols. First, premeditation malorum, the premeditation of adversity. Seneca and Marcus both practiced deliberately imagining worst-case scenarios, not to spiral but to mentally rehearse a rational response. In modern CBT, this maps to imaginal exposure therapy and what researchers call stress inoculation training. A 2008 meta-analysis by Hoffman and Smits, published in the Journal of Clinical Psychiatry, covering 27 randomized controlled trials, found that exposure-based CBT produced a large effect size of Hedges G equal 0.73 compared to placebo for anxiety disorders. The Stoics figured out the mechanism 18 centuries before the clinical trial confirmed it. Second, the dichotomy of control. Epictetus taught that you must ruthlessly distinguish between what is within your power and what is not, then redirect all energy toward what you can control. In CBT, this is the foundation of cognitive restructuring, identifying which thoughts are actionable and which are distorted, catastrophizing about things outside your influence. Third, Seneca's evening review. In Deira on Anger, Seneca describes his nightly practice. When the light has been removed and my wife has fallen silent, I examine my entire day and go back over what I've done and said. He reviewed his actions, identified where he went wrong, and planned corrections. This is functionally identical to what CBT calls a thought record, a structured daily log of triggering events, automatic thoughts, emotions, and rational reappraisals. And the science on this is staggering. Dr. James Pennebaker at the University of Texas began studying expressive writing in 1986 and has published decades of research showing that structured journaling about thoughts and emotions produces measurable improvements in immune function, reduces inflammation, and significantly decreases symptoms of anxiety and depression. His research demonstrates that the act of writing forces cognitive restructuring. You cannot write about an experience without organizing it into a narrative, which automatically creates psychological distance from the raw emotion. Fourth, voluntary discomfort. The Stoics deliberately practiced cold exposure, fasting, sleeping on hard surfaces, not as punishment, but as training. Seneca wrote, "Set aside a certain number of days during which you shall be content with the scantiest and cheapest fare, with coarse and rough dress, saying to yourself the while, 'Is this the condition that I feared?'" In CBT, this maps to behavioral activation and graded exposure, deliberately engaging with discomfort to reduce avoidance and build resilience. Now here is the part they really do not want you to know. A 2012 review in Cognitive Therapy and Research analyzed 269 meta-analytic studies on CBT and concluded it is the most extensively researched form of psychotherapy in history, with the strongest evidence base for anxiety disorders, depression, and stress-related conditions. The techniques that drove those results are, at their core, Stoic practices with clinical branding. The global mental health market was valued at approximately $450 billion in 2024. The U.S. behavioral health market alone is worth over $90 billion. The self-improvement industry adds another $14 billion. Meditation apps, Calm, and Headspace leading the pack, generated roughly $1.9 billion in 2024. Calm alone pulls in an estimated $90 million per year in-app revenue. The average therapy session in the United States now costs between $100 and $250 per hour. In major cities, specialist CBT therapists routinely charge $200 to $300 per session. A standard course of CBT is 12 to 20 sessions. That is $24 to $6,000 for techniques that a Roman emperor documented in a journal you can read online for free. None of this required a conspiracy. It just required everyone to follow their financial interest. A philosophy that tells you the answer is already inside you, that you need a journal, not a subscription, cannot be metered, billed, or turned into a recurring revenue stream. So instead, the core insights of Stoicism were repackaged as proprietary clinical protocols, credentialed behind licensing requirements, and delivered through an insurance billing system that rewards 12-session treatment plans over teaching someone to fish. The self-help industry sells you the same Stoic principles in a new cover every year. The subtle art of not giving a f***. That is the dichotomy of control in a hoodie. Meditation apps charging $70 a year to tell you to observe your thoughts without judgment. Epictetus was teaching that in Nicopolis 2,000 years ago for the cost of showing up. They did not hide this because it was dangerous. They hid it because it was free. Here's exactly what to do, and it is almost insultingly simple. Step 1. Get a journal. Any journal. A $3 composition notebook works. No app required, no subscription, no branded Stoic planner, just paper and something to write with. Step 2. Morning. Premeditatio malorum. Spend 5 minutes each morning writing down what could go wrong today. Not to catastrophize, but to pre-process. Ask, what is the worst realistic outcome? How would I handle it? What is actually within my control? Marcus Aurelius did this every morning for a decade of war. You can do it over coffee. Step 3. Evening. Seneca's review. Before bed, spend 10 minutes reviewing your day in writing. 3 questions, stolen directly from Seneca. What did I do well today? Where did I fall short? What will I do differently tomorrow? This is a clinically validated thought record. You are performing cognitive restructuring. It costs you nothing but 10 minutes and honesty. Step 4. The Epictetus filter. When you feel anxiety rising during the day, ask one question. Is this within my control or outside it? If it is within your control, act. If it is not, let it go. Write it down if you need to. This single distinction is the backbone of both Stoic philosophy and cognitive behavioral therapy. Step 5. Weekly voluntary discomfort. Once a week, deliberately do something mildly uncomfortable that you have been avoiding. A cold shower, a difficult conversation, eating simply. The goal is not suffering. It is proving to yourself that discomfort is survivable. This is graded exposure therapy. The Stoics called it training for adversity. Now, I need to be completely honest about one limitation. This is not a replacement for professional help if you are in crisis. Severe clinical depression, active suicidal ideation, trauma disorders. These require professional intervention, sometimes including medication. The Stoics themselves acknowledge that some suffering exceeds what philosophy alone can address. Seneca sought medical treatment for his physical ailments. Marcus relied on his physician Galen. What this practice does replace is the assumption that managing your everyday anxiety, building mental resilience, and restructuring negative thought patterns requires a $200 per hour professional and a 12-session treatment plan. For the vast majority of people dealing with everyday stress, worry, and negative thinking, the Stoics wrote the manual. It has been clinically validated, and it is free. Compare that to $2,400 to $6,000 for a standard course of CBT and decide for yourself. Neuroscience does not care about billing codes. Cognitive restructuring works whether you learned it from a licensed therapist in 2025 or a formerly enslaved philosopher in 55 AD. This knowledge did not die. It was waiting, in texts that have been publicly available for nearly 2 millennia, translated into every major language, sitting on library shelves and free websites. The only thing that changed was who controlled the story. And now you control it. Marcus Aurelius wrote his journal for an audience of one, himself. He never imagined anyone would read it. And yet, 18 centuries later, The private coping strategies of a man managing a crumbling empire by lamplight on the Danube became the most rigorously tested psychological framework on Earth. The irony is almost unbearable. The most effective anxiety treatment ever clinically validated was written by a man who would have given it away for free. And for 1800 years, it was. If this opens something for you, subscribe and share. Every share puts a crack in the wall between ancient wisdom and the people who actually need it. The next video opens soon, and it goes deeper into the specific Stoic practice that neuroscientists say physically rewires your brain in as little as 4 days. That video is on your screen right now. Click it.